Is Michael Toomim, coming from the University of Washington, and the title of his paper is Utility of Human-Computer Interactions Toward a Science of Preference Management. Take it away, everyone.
You guys like fuchsia? So now a different dongle.
You can get a different dongle.
This is a VGA dongle.
I'll just leave it.
Jesus. What's that box down there? Travis, go touch the box again.
Okay. Hello everyone, welcome to space. Okay. I'm Michael Toomim. This is my co-authors, Travis Crippling, James Landay, and Klaus Portner, who's not here. Okay, it's going to be red. This talk is about the fundamentals of how, when we build an interface or application, how we evaluate it, how we see if it's met our goals. Would you like to hold it for 70 minutes? Okay. Thank you very much. Okay, so let's go back to 1983. Let's look at the first ever CHI conference. In the first paper session, in the first paper presented in that session, Don Norman posed an open problem in this paper, Design Principles for Human-Computer Interfaces. In this, he proposed that we measure this user satisfaction function for interfaces, U of X. And this function would measure what matters in an interface, everything that matters to the user. This is like the holy grail for user-centered design, because it measures what matters to the user. In HCI, we do measure some aspects. We've also tried hard to get at user-friendliness and learnability. And now we're looking at things like fun and intuitiveness, pretty, sociable. These are aspects of our interfaces which make users more satisfied, which makes things matter to them. But we're not very good at measuring these. We use subjective measures that are kind of difficult sometimes. And Don Norman said, well, wait, man, if we can measure user satisfaction function, this U of X, we can start to build a science of what matters to our users. And this is core to HCI. But unfortunately, he could never actually measure it. The best he could do is draw these line graphs that he just kind of came up with in his mind. He's like, this is probably what it would look like. And so we couldn't really get to a science. So let's take a step back. And how did we get here? So this is the textbook history of HCI, the history of discretionary choice. You can see from the 1960s to 2000s, choice is increasing. Because the original users didn't really have choice in their interfaces. These were people who were working in a nuclear power plant or in an airline cockpit. And the interfaces were something that they were trained to use. They were paid lots of money to learn how to use a system. And then all that really mattered was if the interface was fast and error-free. And then in the 80s, all of a sudden, users had choice in what they used. We had computers invading offices. People had tons of computers they could choose amongst, commodity software. And a lot of other things started to matter. Because the user was like, hey, I don't want to use this if it's not user-friendly, if it's not learnable. And so this is when we went from human factors, studying time and errors, to CHI, which studied whether an interface was user-friendly and learnable. CHI was born from this choice. Our core values are centered around choice. And Donald Norman proposed we measure choice in this user satisfaction function, which unfortunately we have yet to be able to get to. And today, this is even more important. Now we have things that are really important, like not just the interfaces being fast and fun, but the aesthetics, the social value. Is it convenient for you? Like, is Foursquare convenient for you to check in on? Is it intuitive? Is your interface polite? Does it maintain your privacy? Is it something you can trust? Because users have gazillions of websites out there to choose among, gazillions of tasks, gazillions of choices, and the question of what they'll choose is ever more important. And in industry now, like Google, their emphasis is not on making money. This is a quote from Eric Schmidt. He said, business plans, what you'll find at Google is a focus on getting more users to use stuff. And if users will use stuff, then we can make money on it. And he really meant choose stuff. He wants them to choose Google. Major websites out there, they measure choice with A/B testing. This is how usability is done in the real world. This is how decisions are made. The success for a website is if they get a lot of ad clicks, page views, user programs. User satisfaction, well, what does it do? It determines what someone's going to choose. This is why it's important. It's going to determine what's going to be successful. And our first contribution here is to substitute, instead of user satisfaction, let's look at utility, which also has a U of X. But utility, this is an economic concept, which is defined as determining a user's choice, or a person's choice. This is what it means. Utility defines a person's preferences. And the key thing here is that we can actually infer utility from behavior. Okay? From the choices. We get to go backwards. And this is how we can finally measure utility. So, our contribution here is to measure utility of the user interface. And what you do is you create experiments where users have choices among different interfaces, and then you measure their behavior. So just to recap, utility is a concept from economics. We can measure today using choice experiments, okay, rather than time on task and rather than surveys. And I'm going to demonstrate one such method that uses Mechanical Turk. Okay, now this is just first steps. This isn't going to satisfy everything, but it's getting us somewhere. So here's our method. Let's take multiple variations of the user interface, and we'll post them on Mechanical Turk. We'll put them at different prices. And now we can see how many people choose to do the tasks for different interfaces for different prices. Because users on Mechanical Turk get to choose different tasks to do for different prices. Okay, so this is an economic experiment. And it's a little bit different than a lot of Mechanical Turk tasks that we actually kind of throw away the work that people do and just look at how much work is getting done and how much we have to pay them to do it. So the first thing we might want to do here is see, what if we could look at a basic HCI kind of phenomenon. So this is a Fitts law study. The bar goes left and right, and you click on it. And you can make the bar bigger or smaller. We've run hundreds of Fitts law studies in HCI, and we've gotten really good at measuring the time it takes someone to click on something. But we haven't measured how important that is. How much does it matter if it's easier to click on something? So that's what we're going to do now. So we take this, we post it on Mechanical Turk. I'm not going to give you the full details of the method, they're in the paper, but our jobs are hidden behind this mystery task thing. So people don't know what they're getting into until they start doing it, at which point they can quit whenever they want. And this way, we're able to have a complete between subject study without biases. So when we do this, we get a bunch of different completion rates, and this is the same thing you might get with A/B testing. But we do this on Mechanical Turk. And you can see, okay, the big bar one on the right, people did a lot more work than the little bar. They gave up a lot quicker. But here's where our second major contribution is, which is that you can see how much people are choosing your interface based on the pay and how much they're choosing it based on the interface. Okay, so that's cool. But what if we wanted to relate these two qualities? So let's look at how much pay it's required, or how much pay is equivalent to difference in interface. So the difference between interfaces A and B on the pay axis turns out to be 3.8 cents. So this tells us that you'd have to pay a user 3.8 cents more for them to use the skinny button rather than the bigger button. This is how much it's actually worth to them, worth to users on average. So this would be useful if you take this number, maybe you normalize it to hourly wage. You can start to get a feeling for how much this matters to people. And now you can also take this number and you can compare it to other interfaces, other tasks, or other factors. like beauty. So maybe we want to take this and apply it to the bubble cursor and see, let's see how much value the bubble cursor has. We already know how much faster it is, but it's also kind of weird. So how does that trade off? What's the value of having a start button in the lower left corner? We could apply this to a wide variety of HCI research. And we can start to measure the utility of efficiency. But we can also start to measure the utility of fun. So what if we turned this fits all task into a game that had points and a scoreboard and had people compete against each other and made the bars fly around and have flashing colors and lights? What if we started popping out dialog boxes because every once in a while the bar doesn't work and you get errors? How does that affect utility? Or learnability? We've got social reward. Or aesthetics. We can try all these different things and see how they trade off and how much utility they have to people. So let's look at aesthetics. Here's our second study that we ran. This is a CAPTCHA interface. You can enter the CAPTCHA and click the button and it tells you how many you have left. We're kind of wondering what would happen if you made this really ugly. So we made it really ugly. We had a flashing banner ad and a green background. And when we ran this in our study, we found it was negative 0.6 cents worse. So this was negative 0.6 cents to get the same amount of work out of people answering 10 CAPTCHAs at a time. So we've shown here we can now measure the utility of Fitts law. We can quantify the value of aesthetics and a number that you can compare to Fitts law. And with this money metric, you can compare different things. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about our method now. So Mechanical Turk has some really nice advantages, actually. It's very fast and cheap, as you'll hear many, many times. So these studies ran in they would cost between $50 and $1,000. They ran about a half a day. You can change something and just run it again. Unique to this is that we can now, or another scientist, and they can replicate results or generalize it just by pushing a button. It makes it much more amenable to science. And I find these to be very, very exciting prospects to build a science of utility in HCI. Of course, this method does not do everything. Say you're interested in studying the utility of uploading photos to your daughter on Facebook. Since we have other people on Mechanical Turk doing this task, we're not going to be able to measure the value of uploading photos to your daughter because we're just saying upload these photos. What we measure is the operational mechanical cost of using the interface. And there's other limitations we talk about in the paper. But overall, this is just one technique in the space of utility measurement. There are many more techniques to develop. We did this thing in the upper left. If you wanted to study more of that social value, you might do something in the upper right. And you can read more about this space in the paper. And so, to me, this looks like a big challenge. That there's a lot to do in utility measurement. We haven't really done work like this before. But this is really important because this is the core of our values. This is what CHI was built upon. And we have yet to actually measure it. I think the alternative here is just becoming irrelevant to practice. Because time on task and errors doesn't take us that far. And qualitative methods don't predict. So overall, in the last 20 years, HCI has been doing a lot of work borrowing methods from other fields like cognitive psychology and ethnography. But it's time that we generate our own methods for our own measures, for things that matter to us, for our values. So let's solve our own problems. Let's measure what matters, utility.
Great. I welcome folks to come up to the microphone for questions.
So the price I would require for having held that thing for 18 minutes is the right to ask a critical question. First of all, I think it's excellent work in terms of finding ways of quantifying particular aspects of the user experience that figure in users' choices. But I would object to what you had in the first couple of slides, in which you sort of present it as a general way of quantifying choice. The idea there is that people make choices by evaluating option A, evaluating option B, and the one with the highest utility wins. Unfortunately, that notion is